Good morning and welcome to the webinar information about the Moving Greater Minnesota Forward Winter Solicitations. We'll be talking about the Phase 2 solicitations under Moving Greater Minnesota Forward, as well as the Disadvantaged Community Carshares grant. My name is Elliot McFadden, and I am the Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Coordinator at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. Before we jump into the information about the solicitations, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our programming here at MnDOT. The Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Program started out as our state rideshare program and was expanded in 2020 to encompass not just things like van pools and carpools, but all sorts of shared mobility technologies. We have three areas of focus. The first area is building on the general understanding of shared mobility options, and we have done that through a series of webinars we've hosted the last several years on different subjects around shared mobility, which is available on our shared mobility section of our website. We've also funded several research projects to better understand shared mobility and its impact on communities. The second area that we focus on is building a network of organizations in support of shared mobility. Eventually we will be hosting a Greater Minnesota Shared Mobility Conference. And our main work in this area is the support of the Minnesota Shared Mobility Collaborative, which started out as a Twin Cities focused organization, but with support from MnDOT in this program, has grown to be a statewide organization containing folks from the public, private, and academic sectors, helping to develop shared mobility in the state. And then finally, we're looking for opportunities to support shared mobility pilots in Greater Minnesota, which is what we'll be talking about more specifically today. So before we go much further, we want to just make sure everybody's on the same page when we talk about shared mobility. What is that? And it's a transportation service that is shared among users. And that can be being shared by users at the same time or independently of one another. So examples of services where folks share transportation at the same time include public transit, taxis and ride hails, and carpooling and van pooling. And examples of instances where folks share independently are short-term car rental or car share, bike share, scooter share, and delivery. And just a little bit about me before we jump in. I'm a 16-year veteran of the shared new mobility industry. My work started with launching the first car sharing service in the state of Texas, and then was the founding CEO of the city bike share system there. During that period, I was a co-founder of the North American Bike Share Association. And currently, in addition to the work around moving Greater Minnesota forward and helping other folks do pilots, I also lead our regional mobility as a service project at MnDOT. And I have led on multiple product development projects and innovation projects using lean startup principles, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So what is Moving Greater Minnesota Forward? It is a new program at MnDOT, and it is designed to build the first rural, tribal, and small urban focused innovative shared mobility ecosystem in the nation. When we were looking at opportunities for Greater Minnesota, we understood that there are many mobility labs and innovative incubators throughout the country and throughout the world that focus on highly urbanized areas, but that there are unique needs to rural, tribal, and small urban communities that those solutions don't necessarily scale down. And so we really needed a development platform to help projects that could meet those needs. And we focus on three phases. The first phase is idea development, the second real-world testing, and the third is scaling success. And all of these stages are designed to be a collaboration between all sectors to provide a clear roadmap, technical and financial support for projects so they can be as successful as possible. Just briefly, our phase 1 programming is a incubator of cohorts that meet every 6 months. We accept up to 12 projects per cohort to develop their idea, and we have had one in last fall, and we have one currently going through our programming, and our next one will be opening in April of this year. And essentially, this is when you have an idea, but you're not yet ready to actually do your project. So any idea, any stage of the idea development phase can be submit a project in here. Any entity that is focusing on a community in Greater Minnesota is eligible to submit and be considered for the program. And our goal here is to get a project from that phase one development to being ready to pursue real world funding in the second phase. The framework we use for this is Lean Startup. It is a project development concept that was developed in the tech industry about 20 years ago as a way to use resources better and end up with a better product at the end. And so the focus in Lean Startup is connecting the solution that you're working with the actual problem. So what problem is my solution solving? This isn't technology for technology's sake or an idea for itself. It needs to be solving a real world problem. It's also human-centered, so it focuses on involving customers and end users as much as possible, as early as possible. And resource light, so you spend time trying to create the closest facsimile to your final idea that requires the least amount of resources. It's called your minimum viable product, so that you can test out ideas before you spend resources to build a full product. It's built on the scientific method, so you have a provable hypothesis that you start with your project, and you use metrics to measure that and see where you are in reaching that hypothesis. And you only scale when an idea meets or exceeds the hypothesized results that you define for success. In the meantime, you further refine your idea, or if you come to a point where you cannot refine any further, you pivot to a new idea. And it creates this virtuous cycle of building, measuring, and learning that ends up saving time and money, reducing risk, and making a better product in the end. So our programming under phase one takes advantage of this lean startup process. It's led by an entity called ILT Academy out of St. Cloud. They have a 10-week course with each cohort, and it includes coaching as well during that period in lean startup principles. The cohorts work collaboratively in their class to develop their ideas and do a final presentation at a program showcase at the end. They also get 6 more months of coaching from ILT Academy. And there are stipends available for that. Up to 6 projects per cohort can apply and receive a $4,000 stipend. Phase 2, which we'll be going into more detail today, is our annual grant. We have $500,000 in grants available for real-world demonstration pilots in Greater Minnesota. We are looking for projects that have either gone through our phase 1 work, or they don't have to have gone through our program, but have done similar work to develop their idea and define what the marketplace looks like. And we are looking for projects that are shared mobility that will support public transit and or active transportation. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that in a moment. And then our final phase is scaling. So this is after phase 2, when projects have demonstrated they are successful and want to grow and scale. We look at 3 possible roads for those projects. If there's a commercialization opportunity, we have a chance to partner with our colleagues at the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development and their Launch Minnesota program to match projects with angel and venture capital investment. If it's more of a public service, there are opportunities for projects to take advantage of direct procurement of services through new or existing programs. Or if we want to look at leveraging many different funding sources, there may be an opportunity to develop a public-private partnership entity that continues to leverage those and grow the program. So just in a quick summary, this is our program, gives you a sense of the roadmap and the support that we are trying to bring to projects and make them a success. So now we'll get to the part that you're probably here for, which is talking about the solicitations that we posted last week. So the first one I'll be talking about is our winter 2024 solicitation for the Greater Minnesota, Moving Greater Minnesota Forward Phase 2 program. As I mentioned, we have $500,000 available in pilot funding for shared mobility pilots in Greater Minnesota. This comes from a one-time appropriation from the Minnesota legislature designed to support projects around public transit and active transportation. And for this and the other solicitation, I do ask folks to reference our solicitation guide. We will not cover everything in complete detail. That is your guiding document. So if we don't cover something here or you're wanting to know more details about the process, all of that is available on the website for each grant. Timeline for these grants, we opened the solicitation last Monday on February 5th, and the applications will be due Tuesday, April 30th. And we expect to make an award announcement within a month on Tuesday, May 28th. Eligibility. So in this solicitation, a project must be located in Greater Minnesota. Greater Minnesota is defined as the area of Minnesota outside of the 7 counties of the Twin City metro area. So if you have a project that's in the metro area, we can help connect you with Metro Council and their regional solicitation process, but those projects will not be eligible for the Phase 2 grant. They must involve a shared mobility service, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And you need to demonstrate in the proposal how the service is supporting existing transit or active transportation, which is defined as bikes, e-bikes, or pedestrian travel. And these are for pilot projects, not ongoing funding, so they cannot be more than a 24-month period. We have 5 priorities we have set out for this program that we'd like to see in project proposals. The first is projects that make first mile, last mile connections to transit or are a supplementary service to transit that's the transit agency isn't currently providing. Second is projects that serve historically underserved communities or disadvantaged communities that don't currently have or don't have sufficient public transit services. The third is looking at existing shared mobility services, as we defined earlier, and seeing how we can improve efficiencies or the business model for those existing services. The fourth area is winterization models. Some shared mobility technologies really are designed for fair weather, and being a true 4-season state, we want to see options to allow shared mobility to be a year-round available option. And then finally, electrification of shared mobility. So we want to see where we can remove internal gas combustion engines from travel options and replace with electric. In your application, so what are you going to need to apply? So the first thing is we have an online form. You'll need to fill that out and answer all of the questions to start your application process. You also will have required attachments. These attachments include your budget narrative, which we'll talk about, affidavit of non-collusion form and conflict of interest form. These are 2 forms that you need to sign and are in the solicitation guide. And then if you are a nonprofit organization, there are some financial documents you're required to submit. I won't go into a lot of detail because it really depends on the size of your organization, how long you have been incorporated, and the size of your budget. There are 3 different potential documents that you would submit with that. Those details are on page 9 of the solicitation guide. Other optional attachments that you may want to include that'll help us make a decision about your project include if you are providing any matching funds, we need a document showing proof of those matching funds. If you've got other partners who are going to be a part of your project, a letter of commitment from them that they'll be working on your project with you if you're funded. If you have letters of support from other organizations, community members that you want to include, any planning and development documents, market analysis, including surveys, interviews, and reports. Excuse me. And then any visual representations you want to include for your project. Please do not include any proprietary or intellectual property in your application. Your application will be a public document and could be open to an open records request, so anyone from the public could be able to review it. Scoring for these projects. So we have a base scoring method that we look at the general proposal. So the quality of the proposal, your budget narrative, what, if any, match funding you're providing, and your alignment with our MnDOT priorities. You can get up to a maximum of 100 points based on that. And then we have some bonus points. So if you are doing a project that involves a disadvantaged community, and we'll talk about what that means here in a second, you can get an additional 15 points. And then if you're helping to meet our geographic balance goals, you can receive an additional 5 points. And we will be awarding based on how projects score. So looking at the quality of the proposal, things we want to look at, and you'll see this in the application. These are some of the questions that we're going to be asking you. So what is the problem that your project is trying to address? What is the thing in the community that this is going to improve? Who specifically are your customers that you're trying to reach, and possibly end users, if different? So your customer and your end user might be two different groups. And then what's the size of the market you're trying to serve? What are the current alternatives and how are you different? Any outreach or interviews you've done to help understand what's going on with your project. And then general project readiness. So what planning work have you done to date? What is your implementation plan, including a timeline with key milestones and deliverables? What are some of the partnership agreements, partnerships and other kinds of agreements you have in place? What experience your team brings to the project? And then identifying any barriers you have to implementation and how you may overcome them. So an example of that is if you say, for example, wanted to launch a scooter system and the community you work in doesn't legally allow a scooter system to operate, then you'd need to address how you're going to overcome that. Within the budget narrative area, your project budget needs to be included in that document, including separation by categories. And then within that category, how much are you requesting from the grant that you're applying for that category? After your budget section, you're going to need to include a narrative for each category that outlines what those costs mean, what the category means, and how you determined these costs. So did you get quotes? Are you using this based off an existing contract, or you've reviewed similar projects or examples? We do require certain categories to be in all budget narratives. Even if it's a $0 amount, you can just put $0 for that. We want to see operations, software, vehicle purchasing or leasing, marketing, staff salaries, and fringe. And for this grant, no more than 20% of the budget can be on planning and no more than 10% on administrative costs. We want projects that are pretty much ready to go. You may need some final planning to do, but they're not a substantial part of the project. We do have a sample budget narrative document that you are welcome to use for that, or you can create your own based on these guidelines. A few other items on the scoring. So match funding, you're not required to secure match funding, but we do want to see opportunities to leverage the investment that we're making and multiply the state funding. So for every 4% of your total budget costs that you bring to the table in non-applicant dollars, so not dollars that you're not applying for through this grant, you receive 4% for a maximum of 20% or 80% of the budget. So if you're only asking for 20% of your costs, you would be getting the maximum 20 points, for example. Then in our MnDOT priorities, as I mentioned, we have 5 of them that I outlined earlier. You will get 10 points for addressing one of these priorities, and then each additional priority up to the maximum, you get 5 additional points. And then for our bonus points, in the equity area, you will get 15 points if your project is serving a census tract or tracts that are designated as disadvantaged. Under the outlined federal mapping tools, we have 3 mapping tools that are linked to in the solicitation guide. If your project is in one of those, then you will receive equity points for that. And then geographic balance, if you are the only project that is being submitted from a MnDOT district, then you will get a 5 points added to your final score for that. And there's a link in the solicitation guide to see that map and see what that looks like. So with that, I will jump into our second grant, and then at that point, I will swing back around and answer questions. If you have questions at this point, please go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will try to get through as many of those as possible within our webinar timeline, and anything we don't get to, I will follow up directly and answer. So we have a second grant that we are making available called the Disadvantaged Communities Carshare Solicitation. It is an additional $500,000, so it is a separate grant that is a separate $500,000 total award amount that is designed to help provide car share programming for disadvantaged communities in Minnesota. This is a statewide program, so if you are a project in the Twin Cities, you are eligible to apply. This comes from a one-time funding appropriation from the Minnesota legislature for this fiscal year. And again, we have a separate solicitation guide on the grant page for the community car share solicitation. So do refer you to that for any specific guidance. So just to make sure we're defining what car share means, it is a short-term car rental where where charging is done by time, distance, or a combination of both. So you want to think of this as rentals in hours and minutes, not days, like a traditional car rental. It is designed to be self-check via either an app or a member card or other sort of access code. The model can be an A to A, so a round trip sort of model, or A to B, point to point. The model can be based on a home base for the vehicle, station-based, so vehicles have to be returned to specific locations, or completely free-floating vehicles can start and end at any point within a defined geographic area. And usually with car share, the costs like insurance, fuel, maintenance, and parking are included in that rental cost. This one has a shorter timeline because of our limitations on when dollars can be spent. So we opened the grant on February 5th. Applications for this are due on Wednesday, March 6th, and we expect to make an announcement by Tuesday, April 2nd. Eligibility, this is defined by the legislation that was passed along with its funding. The applicant must be Minnesota-based and a nonprofit organization or a car share operator. And preference on applications will be given to nonprofit operators. Transportation management organizations are not eligible to apply for this grant. So these are defined by the legislation. So these are requirements for the lead applicant. Eligibility of costs, basically anything that you are including that is part of implementing a car share service can be included. So that's marketing, programming, and community outreach. Proposals must serve a disadvantaged community. So in the previous one, that's something you get bonus points for, but in this one, it is a requirement. And so when you are submitting, you need to define disadvantaged. You are defining what community you are serving. And if you are serving census tracts designated as disadvantaged under those federal mapping tools that we talked about on the last grant, that will make you automatically eligible. So those are automatically defined as disadvantaged communities. If you are serving a community or a subset of a community that is outside of one of those tracts, then you're going to need to demonstrate in your application how you're defining them as disadvantaged. On the application, this is going to look very similar, so I won't go into too much detail. We have an online application again. You'll need to answer all those questions. The required attachments are the same, so budget narrative, the affidavit of non-collusion and conflict of interest forms, and for nonprofits, the financial document for your organization. On this one, it's on page 7 of the solicitation guide. And again, very similar. I won't go into detail on this, but essentially anything else you want to include to show your readiness for your project. The scoring on this is a little bit different. We don't have the bonus point section, so 100 points will be the maximum score, looking at the quality of the proposal, the quality of the budget narrative, project readiness, project experience, and geographic balance. Under quality of proposal, we're really looking for a good understanding of the market fit for your service. What work you've done to work with that disadvantaged community and identify that this is a service that they would like to use and will meet a real need within that community. Any of that planning and outreach work to date, your general project narrative, and then your implementation plan. So those include your key milestones and deliverables on a timeline. In the budget narrative, that is pretty much the same as the last. We want to see that budget, what funding you're looking for, and then the categories, and in more detail, what justifies the costs of those categories. Under project readiness, we want to see anything you have to secure partnerships, if there's any permitting that is required, things that you've secured there, and any other sort of agreements. Also, if there's any further infrastructure like parking, electric vehicle charging that is needed, how will you secure that? How will that be implemented? And then if there are any barriers to implementation, as I mentioned before, how do you plan to overcome those? And again, on this one, match funding is not required, but projects that come with match funding will receive higher scores for that in the project readiness area. Project experience, this is a more important part of this because Carshare is an established service, and so as opposed to sort of a new pilot, so we want to make sure that you're coming to the table with experience delivering Carshare services, and so you want to explain how you've done that in general and how you've done that specifically in disadvantaged communities. We also want to see a list of key staff, and if those staff are identifiable, let us know their names and background of experience that they have. And then geographic balance is the same. So we have the MnDOT districts. If you are the only project coming from that district, you'll get 5 additional points. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and come back here and see if we've got questions. All right, I'm looking. We've got lots in the chat. So I will start from the top. We have a question. If 2 entities plan to collaborate between their communities, can both entities apply for funding to cover their individual expenses, or is it one for the applicant for the project? So you can have multiple entities apply. The grant will be to a single entity, so you want to go ahead and identify that as a lead, and then include a letter of commitment from that second entity, and sort of what roles they're going to play, and then define in your budget narrative how the funding is going to be split between the two. So the way the application is set up is it's set up for a single entity, but there is a section for partner organizations. So you would identify that second or more organizations under that area, and then both in your narrative and in your budget, you'd want to define, how funding is going to be split. There was a question about, is this for projects that have already completed phase one? No, you do not have to have completed phase one in our Moving Greater Minnesota Forward program to apply for either of these grants. I think we share that phase one information so that projects that maybe aren't ready to apply or are interested in that programming can take advantage of that. And I guess just to know that the work that's done in phase one is the kind of work that we want to see in an applicant if they've not gone through our program, so that you've taken the time to plan out your project, to engage with folks in the community that you're wanting to serve, to understand what the problem is, and to make sure that there's a good market fit there. Can you share some ideas that were from the first phase? I will go ahead and put in the chat here in a second a link to our page that lists the projects that were both in both our phase one cohorts, so both from the fall and the spring. But they really vary. Some of them are things like microtransit, developing more functionality around scooters, more functionality and more service area for taxi services are some examples. But it really was a wide array of different services. So we do have that on our website, and I will include a link to that here shortly. Says, we are a mobility as a service technology provider. Are you able to share a list of underserved community organizations that are looking for a shared mobility project that needs a technology partner? That's not something that we really do in the phase two side of things. That's more of our phase one work. So, really trying to match communities with potential providers is something that we do in our phase one development. So if you're interested in phase two, you need to be already kind of in a place where you have your partner in place. Okay, there was a note from our car just saying that they're open to partner proposals. Let's see. How do we access this recording moving forward to reference, please? So this recording will be posted on the solicitation page for both grants within the next few days. So we will post that recording. We'll also send out an email to folks to let them know when that's posted. There was a request, any car sharing organizations on this call that would collaborate in Greater Minnesota or Duluth. So if you're one of those, see Beverly. Would a car share solicitation be allowed in a tribal community? Yes. A tribal community could apply for the disadvantaged, or a project in a tribal community could apply for the Disadvantaged Community Carshare grant, or if they were in Greater Minnesota, they could also look to apply for the Moving Greater Minnesota Forward grant, so they could apply for either. My nonprofit has addicted mental health disadvantages and have no car driving privileges and must be kept separate with fellow facility residents. Okay, I think that's just a statement. For the Moving Greater Minnesota Forward Grant Program, do you have an idea of how many awards you're looking to give out? No, we don't have a set amount. That's really going to be defined by the projects that come in. As I said, we have $500,000 in total funding for all the projects that apply on that. And so it'll really depend on the applications that we receive and how much funding folks have already secured. One thing I did want to mention that is mentioned in the solicitation guide, if you are planning on applying for match funding, say there is a philanthropic grant or a federal grant that you are looking to apply that will be happening after this solicitation, you can apply and you can identify that grant as the one that you are pursuing. Any award, if we do select you, would be contingent on you getting that other award, but we can be sort of the initial funding that helps you pursue other grants as well. So just note the solicitation guide goes into more detail about what sort of documentation you need to show for that in what detail. But if there is, just so you know, if you've already secured a grant, obviously that's match money you can bring to the table and be scored appropriately. But if there's a grant that is coming after our solicitation closes that you are planning to apply for, you can include that, just to keep in mind. It is any award we might give you would be contingent on you getting that other funding. Okay, for the car sharing and disadvantaged community grant, are there any recommendations regarding award size and application amounts? No, we don't have any requirements there. The total amount for that is $500,000. So, we can do that potentially. It could be a single award, it could be multiple awards across several projects, but we do not have a specific amount other than that total amount can be awarded. Okay, so sorry, this was the question about the addicted community. Question on the addicted is, can a grant apply to be used as described? So going back to that question, this would be a project where you had a qualified driver who does not meet public transportation. So yes, you could, as long as you're kind of presenting how your service is supplementing uh, public transit. Maybe it's filling a gap currently that we don't provide in public transit. That's fine. So in this case, the proposal is that the end user, which would be this population that's really doesn't have driving privileges, would need to have a vehicle provided with a driver. That is something that could qualify for the grant. You just need to point out, how you're filling a need. Maybe there's a gap in the current public transit delivery that doesn't serve that population. Maybe it's for a specific time of day or for a specific kind of trip. That's okay. If it is designed to compete against or directly replace a public transit trip that's already happening, I think that's where you would potentially run into problems. But I think, as you've described, that is certainly possible. There's a question: is a 5311 funding eligible to be used as a match? Yes. So that is a question. 5311 is a type of transit funding that's from the Federal Transit Administration. Yes, essentially anything that is not this grant can count as your match. So it could be other state grant funding, it could be a federal funding, it could be local tax dollars, it could be a philanthropic grant, it could be operational funding that you bring to the table. There are, as long as it's additional funding, there are anything would be eligible to bring to the table at that point. Are there any requirements to show long-term funding sustainability? This would, I think, is for the probably more for the Moving Greater Minnesota Forward program. No, because this is designed as a pilot to test out an idea. So we won't be scoring based on that because I don't think you'll really know what your opportunities are until you do the project. So the question for CarShare as well, that is not currently part of the that was not laid out as part of a requirement in the legislative funding and is not part of the current scoring. So long-term funding, I think it could be indirectly if you identify that. It might be something that could be taken into account with sort of project readiness, but for both projects, you would not be penalized for not providing that information. This is great. We've got about 15 more minutes left. So if folks have any other questions that they want to put in the chat, they can. I will just say as a follow-up for folks that if you have questions after this, the way that you would address that is you would go ahead and submit a question in writing to me. I'm the contact person for both these solicitations. So if you have questions that come up, I will respond to you in writing. Uh, Question, would a lending library of commercial cargo e-bikes fit the shared mobility definition? Yes, I think it would. That's a library would infer being shared. And then we do mention delivery as part of the shared mobility definition. So we do go into a little bit more detail in the solicitation guide, but if you do have questions about whether your idea would be eligible, if it doesn't fall under something that we've listed, do feel free to reach out to me. And while I'm waiting for another question, let me go ahead and grab that list of our Phase 1 awards. I'm putting in the chat a link to the projects in the last two cohorts that were selected from Phase 1. And then I'm hoping everybody has this, but I will go ahead and put in the links as well to both solicitation pages. All right. So I will give about another 10 or 15 seconds to see if anybody has any additional questions. We are really excited to have this opportunity to grow shared mobility in Minnesota. And so excited to see what projects you have that come up. Again, if you do have questions, please feel free to get in touch with me directly. And look forward to seeing what you guys bring in. Thank you so much.